Sometimes, sometimes beauty is the only thing that reminds us we're still alive. The words came from a woman sitting on the bench at the 5th Street bus stop, her voice barely audible over the evening traffic. She wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, just releasing a truth into the cold November air, the way grief sometimes demands to be spoken aloud. Her designer coat was buttoned wrong, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes, and her hands trembled as they gripped a crumpled tissue. Callum Reed stood a few feet away, his last painting tucked under one arm, a duffel bag containing everything he still owned slung over his shoulder. He'd been on his way to the pawn shop, hoping to get maybe $40 for the canvas, enough for a week at the shelter, enough to keep surviving just a little longer. But something in the woman's voice stopped him mid-step. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the particular species of pain that comes from losing something irreplaceable. He recognized it because he wore it too, though his had settled in different places, the permanent shadows under his eyes, the way his hands never quite stopped shaking, the hollow space in his chest where hope used to live. Callum was 31, but felt decades older. 3 years ago, his parents had died in an apartment fire while visiting him in the city. A faulty space heater, a tragedy measured in minutes. The guilt had been crushing. They'd come to see him, to celebrate his first gallery showing, and instead they died in his building because the landlord had ignored safety violations. The lawsuit had dragged on for years, draining what little savings they'd had for legal fees before ultimately collapsing. Then his wife, Natalie, had left. Not because she stopped loving him, she'd said, but because watching him drown in grief while sacrificing his art to pay bills was killing her too. She'd needed to save herself. He understood, even as it shattered what remained of his heart. Some people leave not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation, and sometimes that's the most honest thing they can do. Now, Callum painted in shelters and public libraries, sold his work on street corners for whatever people would offer, and tried to remember why he'd ever believed beauty mattered in a world that seemed designed to crush tender things. But this woman at the bus stop, she looked like she needed beauty more than he needed $40. "Excuse me," he said softly, approaching with the careful gentleness of someone who understands that pain makes people fragile. "I couldn't help but hear what you said about beauty, and I think you might need this more than I do right now." She looked up, startled, her eyes focusing on him for the first time. They were a striking gray-green, currently swimming with unshed tears. "I'm sorry?" Callum unwrapped the painting carefully. It was small, maybe 16 by 20 inches, depicting a single window in a dark room. Through that window, dawn was breaking, not the explosive sunrise of postcards, but the quiet, almost uncertain way light first touches the world. Soft lavenders bleeding into pale gold, the promise of day when night feels endless. "I painted this last week. It's called Tomorrow Keeps Coming. I was going to sell it, but I think maybe it's meant for you instead right now." The woman stared at the canvas, and something in her face cracked open. A sob escaped before she could stop it, and she pressed her mouth to her hand. I can't. You're trying to sell this. You need the money." "I need a lot of things," Callum admitted, sitting beside her with the painting balanced on his knees. "But right now, what I need most is to remember that art isn't just about money or success. It's about this: one human being offering another human being a reminder that darkness doesn't last forever, even when it feels like it will." She was crying openly now, reaching out to touch the painting with trembling fingers. "My mother died 4 days ago. Aneurysm, no warning. She was just here one moment and gone the next. And I've been sitting at bus stops all over the city because I can't bear to go home to an empty apartment where everything still smells like her perfume." Callum's throat tightened.
I lost both my parents 3 years ago, fire, and I still sometimes catch myself thinking I should call them before I remember. I paused, weighing whether to share more, then deciding that honesty was the only real gift I could offer. The grief doesn't disappear, but it changes. It becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. And beauty helps. It reminds us we're not just our pain. "Who are you?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "Nobody important, just an artist who's had better years." He offered a sad smile. "I'm Callum." "Vivian," she said. "Vivian Ashford." The name meant nothing to him. He didn't know that Vivian Ashford owned the Meridian Gallery, the most prestigious contemporary art space in the city. He didn't know her mother had been the legendary curator Isabel Ashford, and that Vivian had spent the last week fielding condolence calls from collectors and critics while feeling utterly alone in her grief. He simply saw a woman in pain who needed to be reminded that tomorrow keeps coming, even when today is unbearable. "Please," he said, pressing the painting into her hands, "take it. Let it keep you company when the apartment feels too empty. And when you're ready, when the grief isn't quite so sharp, maybe pass it forward. Give it to someone else who needs reminding that light returns." Vivian clutched the painting like a lifeline. "I don't even know what to say, how to thank you." "You don't have to say anything. Just take care of yourself and know that someone who doesn't even know you believes you deserve beauty, especially now." Callum stood, shouldering his duffel bag. His bus was arriving, the one that would take him to the shelter on the east side. He'd figure out the money somehow. He always did. "Wait," Vivian called, standing abruptly. "Please, at least tell me where I can find you, your studio, or—" He laughed, the sound hollow. "I don't have a studio. Most nights I sleep at St. Mark's shelter. But that's okay. I didn't give you the painting expecting anything in return. I gave it because you needed it, and I could help. That's enough." He boarded the bus before she could respond, finding a seat by the window. As they pulled away, she saw her still standing there, the painting held carefully against her chest, and felt something he hadn't experienced in months, the warm, quiet satisfaction of having made someone's unbearable day slightly more bearable. It was only later, 3 days later, when Vivian finally stopped crying long enough to examine the painting properly, that she noticed the small signature in the corner, C. Reed, with a date and the faint inscription of an email address he probably checked at library computers. She sat in her mother's apartment, surrounded by a lifetime of art her mother had collected and championed, and realized she was holding something more valuable than technique or composition. She was holding proof that genuine artistry isn't about skill alone. It's about the courage to give away beauty when you have nothing left. Vivian had inherited her mother's gallery, her mother's connections, her mother's impeccable eye for talent. But she'd also inherited her mother's deepest conviction that art's highest purpose isn't decoration or investment, it's healing. She made a decision. 2 weeks later, Callum received an email at the public library where he sometimes worked on his laptop. The subject line read, "Tomorrow keeps coming." His hands went cold. The email was from Vivian, explaining who she was and what the painting had meant to her. She wrote about her mother, about grief, about how Callum's gift had been the first thing to pierce her numbness. Then she made an offer that seemed impossible, a solo exhibition at the Meridian Gallery. 6 months to create a collection, a stipend to cover living expenses and materials, no strings except the requirement that he paint honestly. "You gave me beauty when I needed it most," she wrote. "Let me give you the chance to share that beauty with others who need it just as badly. This isn't charity, it's recognition. Your art deserves to be seen." Callum read the email 3 times, tears streaming down his face, before he could even begin to process it. He thought about responding that she didn't owe him anything, that the painting had been a gift. But something stopped him, the memory of his parents, who'd always told him to accept kindness as gracefully as he offered it. 6 months later, the exhibition opened. Light through dark windows, the collected works of Callum Reid filled the Marillion Gallery's white walls with paintings of quiet hope. Dawns breaking, candles lit in darkness, hands reaching across divides. Each piece carried the weight of genuine suffering transformed into beauty, of an artist who'd walked through fire and chosen to paint light. The opening night was attended by critics, collectors, and strangers who'd heard about the broke artist and the grieving gallery owner whose chance meeting at a bus stop had created something remarkable. But the moment that mattered most came when Vivian stood beside Callum in front of Tomorrow Keeps Coming, now given pride of place at the exhibition's heart. "You know what I've realized?" she said softly, her eyes on the painting that had changed both their lives. "My mother spent 40 years teaching me to recognize great art, but you taught me something she always knew, but I'd forgotten. Great art isn't just technically brilliant, it's generously given. It's one soul saying to another, 'I see you suffering, and here, take this beauty, let it help.'" Callum smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. "She sounds like she was an incredible person." She was, and she would have loved you, not just your work, but you, the person who gave away his last painting because someone at a bus stop needed beauty more than he needed money. Vivian turned to him, her eyes bright. "That's what I want this gallery to champion from now on. Not just art that sells, but art that heals. Art that remembers kindness is the point of everything." "Sometimes beauty is the only thing that reminds us we're still alive," Callum said, quietly, echoing her words from that November evening. "And sometimes," Vivian replied, "kindness is the only thing that reminds us we're not alone." They stood together, two people who'd lost everything and found their way back through the simple, revolutionary act of seeing each other's pain and choosing compassion. Around them, the gallery hummed with conversation and appreciation, but in that moment, they existed in the quiet space where grace and gratitude meet, where one person's generosity becomes another's salvation, and both are transformed. Because this is the truth that art and kindness both teach us. We are not meant to hoard our light. We're meant to share it, especially in darkness, especially when it costs us something, especially when we ourselves are barely holding on. That's when giving matters most, not when we have plenty, but when we have almost nothing and choose to offer it anyway. And from that choice, from that moment of seeing another's need as more important than our own, entire futures can be rewritten.
If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.